We're going to start off with a little different perspective on the Battle of Gettysburg. And I hope you find this interesting and it'll, stir your thoughts.
Much of what happens about Little Round Top starts really with 1974 with this very, very famous novel, Killer Angels by Michael Shara. Also, if you have not read Killer Angels, it's a wonderful book, except you need to remember the key word in the title. It is a novel, meaning it's not history, it's fiction. And then in 1993, what came up was, of course, the very famous movie Gettysburg. And when this came out, of course, many reenactors got their 15 minutes of fame in this wonderful movie. Now, the problem with Gettysburg and the problem with Killer Angels is that it focuses only on three parts of the battlefield. On July 1st, it focuses on General John Buford. It's played in by Sam Elliott. July 2nd, we deal with Little Round Top of Joshua Chamberlain. And July 3rd, General Pickett. Here's Stephen Lang. And when you look at this
movie and the book, it focuses almost exclusively on Little Round Top, to the exclusion of other parts of the battlefield, especially Cullips Hill and Cemetery Hill, which aren't even mentioned in either of these media. Now, the problem with that, of course, is that it focuses primarily on Colonel Chamberlain and his fictitious Sergeant Buster Kilrain. And it's really interesting, but for many years after the movie came out, the licensed guide said one of the biggest questions in Gettysburg they got is, where's Buster Kilrain buried? And it's, people actually thought this was all true. Now, the thing is about the movie and the book also, General Meade, who had something to do with the Battle of Gettysburg, was on the screen for about 15 seconds. So you can see that the book and the movie have skewed the way we look at the Battle of Gettysburg. Subsequently, Joshua Chamberlain has become an icon and he's become a savior. And Tom Desjardins did a wonderful program many years ago for old Baldy. And he talked about all the different things you can get, Chamberlain related in Gettysburg, keychains and T-shirts and everything else. Now, I think it's important when I do this program that everyone understand that I honor very deeply all of the men who fought on Little Round Top. They demonstrated, as I wrote here, heroism, courage, and sacrifice. So this program in no way is intended to denigrate in any way the men who fought at Little Round Top and at the Battle of Gettysburg. I am focusing instead not on their heroism, but the military importance of Little Round Top. And is Little Round Top the key to the battle, as so many people would have us believe? Now, the hill called Little Round Top, as you know, is one of the most visited locations on the Gettysburg battlefield. Every year, thousands of tourists, and I'm sure if not all of you, almost everybody who's in the audience tonight has climbed up the Little Round Top and stood there and gazed out into the battlefield. And the question is, when you go out there and you gaze at the battlefield, what exactly are you seeing? Well, to do this, we have to go backwards a little bit and talk about the Battle of Gettysburg. Now, General Robert E. Lee decided that he needed to take his army north. And there were several reasons for this. First of all, there was the political reason. He believed that a victory of the Army of the Potomac on northern soil would have a far-reaching impact, especially politically. That indeed what would happen is that if they were victorious, the Democrats would win the election, and chances are that they could negotiate a peace. He also decided he wanted to take the initiative. He wanted to fight the Federal Army at a location of his choosing, not of the choosing of the federal commander. He knew that a move north by the Confederate Army of Northern Virginia would force the Army of the Potomac to follow him north. He was a student of the military tactics of Napoleon, and he understood the importance of seizing the initiative. Now, he had soundly defeated Major General Hooker at the Battle of Chancellorsville, and he wanted to take the seat of war out of Virginia. By this time of the war, Virginia had been fought over for more than 2 years, and at this point, he really needed to give the farms a chance to recuperate. He needed the fields to grow. He needed sustenance for his troops. One of the biggest issues that he was concerned about are supply. And Robert E. Lee wrote, "An invasion of the enemy's country breaks up all his preconceived plans. It relieves our country of his presence, and we subsist while there on his resources. The question of food for this army gives me more trouble and uneasiness than everything else combined. The absence of the army from Virginia gives our people the opportunity to collect supplies ahead." And he wanted to get into Pennsylvania, which had not seen the scourge of war, and where the amount of food, forage, and other supplies would be plentiful, and indeed they were. He wrote to there's many letters and a lot of correspondence between Robert E. Lee and Secretary of War James Seddon, and of course Jefferson Davis. And in one letter he writes, "We must decide between positive loss of inactivity and the risk of action. As far as I can judge, there is nothing to be gained by this army remaining quietly on the defensive." Now, we look at Gettysburg itself. And one of the things and I do a separate analysis of Jeb Stuart on and his Gettysburg campaign. But what he got, Jeb Stuart received three communications, 3 specific orders from Robert E. Lee. And in each of those orders, he was told the following, almost identical. Take a position on General Ewell's right. Place yourself in communication with him. Guard his flank and keep him informed. So Jeb Stuart was to be on the right of General Ewell as he marched north through Maryland and into Pennsylvania. And then the very key order that a lot of historians look at without continuing to read that order. And they talk about you'll be able to judge whether you can pass around their army without hindrance. But that's only one part of that order. The other one says, in either case, after crossing the river, you must move on and feel the right of Ewell's troops. So Jeb Stuart was given very specific orders. So what happens? Well, I think most of you are aware that Jeb Stuart finally bumps, as he marches north, he bumps into something called the Second Corps. Feeling this was the hindrance and assuming latitude that quite honestly General Lee did not give him, Jeb Stuart rides off to the east and disappears into the sunset. He does not arrive in Gettysburg until the evening of July 2nd. Now, in essence, this has left Robert E. Lee blind. Walter Taylor, in his very famous book of 4 Years with General Lee, he writes, no tidings whatever had been received from our cavalry under General Stuart since crossing the river. Lee is without accurate information of the movements and position of the Federal Army. An army without cavalry in a strange and hostile country is as a man deprived of his eyesight and beset by enemies. Well, a very important day
Many things happened June 28th. In the campaign of the Battle of Gettysburg, actually, if you look at June 28th, there are numerous things that occur that shape the battle and change the war. And of course, the most important of these is that Major General George Gordon Meade assumes command of the Army of the Potomac. Now, what were Robert E. Lee's plans? Well, we don't know for sure because he didn't tell us. But generally speaking, we believe that his plan was probably, or most probably, to advance north, attack Harrisburg, move along the Susquehanna River, and take advantage of whatever situation presented itself where he could fight at a place of his choosing. Well, now, again, Robert E. Lee is basically left without cavalry. And the Confederate Army then has no choice but to use infantry to reconnoiter the ground ahead of them. And on June 30th, 1863, J. Johnston Pettigrew's brigade advances, and they see blue uniforms near Gettysburg, and as he does as he's told to do, he turns around and marches back to A.P. Hill and the Third Corps. And he said, I saw Union cavalry ahead of us. Well, what happens then, of course, I think we all know that there's a battle that starts on July 1st, brought on by Major General Henry Heath. Of course, we know that General Reynolds was killed in the beginning of that battle. And now the battle is joined. And Lee's one of his major objectives, and that is choosing a battle at the location that he designated, that thought is dashed. Lee is forced into a battle he did not anticipate and never planned. As a matter of fact, when the Battle of Gettysburg begins, General Lee is west of South Mountain at Chambersburg, and General Meade is still in Maryland. Neither commanding general was on the battlefield. Now, it is important to understand that Gettysburg was indeed an accidental battle. A lot of people, and I've seen this written numerous times, they look at the roads and they say, oh, this was an essential point in Pennsylvania. No, it wasn't. It just so happens that these roads all come together. Neither General Lee nor General Meade have made any plans to fight at the town of Gettysburg. In fact, in Lee's second report of 1864, he writes, in part, it did not be intended to deliver a battle so far from our base unless attacked. But coming unexpectedly upon the whole Federal Army, a battle had therefore in a measure become unavoidable. General Meade, in his testimony to the Committee on the Conduct of the War, writes, the Battle of Gettysburg was never been intended by, that's the way he wrote it, by the way, I did not make a typo there, was never been intended by me to have been fought there. And that if my plans had been carried out as I intended them to be carried out, the battle would not have been fought out there. So Gettysburg was indeed an accident. Now, it's very important to understand something, that when you look at General Lee and when you look at Major General Meade, both of them were topographical engineers. Both of them were engineers in the United States Army. And one thing about an engineer is that they understood the land and they understood where to establish a battle line. Now, General Lee, on each of the 3 days of the battle, attacked the Cullips Hill, Cemetery Hill line every single day. On July 1st, he focused on attacking Cullips Hill, and I think everyone knows the very famous discussion that took place where General Ewell was ordered to take the hill if practicable. And Ewell didn't find it practicable for a whole variety of reasons. But he saw right away with his engineer's eye that this prominence, this is actually higher than Cemetery Hill. that this was very important in holding the line at Gettysburg. In his after battle report, General Lee specifically mentions two commanding heights on the Union right flank. This is what he writes. The enemy occupied a strong position with his right upon two commanding elevations adjacent to each other, one southeast and the other known as Cemetery Hill, immediately south of the town, which lay at its base. So Lee quickly realized that this access right here, these two commanding elevations, held the key to the Battle of Gettysburg. Does he mention Little Round Top? Never. The only thing he writes at all about Little Round Top is in his report, and this is the entire report. And he mentions a third at the other end on which the enemy's left rested. This is the only mention of Little Round Top by General Lee in his reports. He doesn't write it's a commanding elevation. He doesn't write that it's the key to the battlefield. He says, oh, it's a little place, a hill at the end of the line. I think that's instructive. Well, of course, we know that General Meade created then what we call the fishhook line. And originally it was to be anchored here at Cullips Hill, around Cemetery Hill. And by the way, when you go to Gettysburg, in my opinion, Cemetery Hill is probably the most obscure part of the battlefield. With all the stores and shops and everything else, it's almost impossible to tell what Cemetery Hill was at the time of the battle. And then it runs down, as you know, Cemetery Ridge, and it's supposed to be anchored here near Little Round Top. Now, the whole thing now focuses around something that it's really gotten more prominence over the last period of time. And that is the ride of Captain Samuel R. Johnston, Lee's engineer. Now, Johnston was told to reconnoiter south and find out where the Union Army lay. Now, this is a map by Carleton Smith that shows you what Captain Johnston says. He says, I rode up to the top of Little Round Top. Now, obviously, he writes this after the war. I saw no Union soldiers. Now, somehow he missed most of the Third Corps that was coming up. He missed Buford's cavalry, and he missed the 12th Corps men that were still moving off of Little Round Top that morning to go to the Union right. Now, where did he go? We don't know. That's lost to history. But this is what he claims. And what he does, Johnston, is he says the Union line ends here in this field, and it's unanchored. Lee believed then, based on this report, that the Union left flank ended near the Klingel House, which you can see here on the map. Lee then creates what is known as a flank attack or an envelopment. And this is very, very traditional in his West Point training. And what he says is, we're going to hit the Union flank and we're going to go up the Emmitsburg Road on July 2nd. And here are two photographs, one from the Gettysburg National Park, and this is from a place called Historical Digression, which shows you the Emmitsburg Road close to what it appeared to be at that time. So based on Johnston's report, he orders an envelopment by two divisions to roll up what he believes to be the exposed Union left flank. Now, it is very important to understand that in Lee's initial attack plan, he completely bypasses Little Round Top. If Little Round Top had the importance that many writers place on it, in my opinion, General Lee would have said, well, one of our objectives is to capture this little hill. But in fact, this was not Lee's objective. In his initial plan, thinking that the Union line ends here and is basically hanging in the air, this was the initial plan, to sweep around, envelop it, and roll it up. The initial attack was made by, as most of you are aware, Major General John Bell Hood and Lafayette McLaws. These two were part of General Hood's division. And now, of course, the fly in the ointment, the very famous advance of General Sickles out to the Emmitsburg Road, where he creates what is known as a salient. Now, a salient is a bulge in the line. Basically, it like creates a V in the line. And what's really bad, there are many bad things militarily about a salient. One of the things is that if you attack this side of the salient, these soldiers can't help because they can't turn around. They'd be shooting into their own men. And let me just go back a minute. You can also see on this map the fact that he did not have enough soldiers to cover the ground that he now decided to hold. So this is almost the same. And another example of a salient as Gettysburg is Barlow's salient. Now, Francis Barlow was not told to go out to what today is Barlow's Knoll and form a line. He was actually supposed to anchor to the First Corps and swing around this way so that he'd anchor himself here on Rock Creek. Instead, he marches out to the very famous high ground. And of course, this allowed the Confederates to sweep around him, bringing him to the back of the First Corps. Of course, it's very disconcerting having somebody shoot into your back. So this collapses the Union line on July 1st. So that's a salient. So seeing now that Sickles has moved forwards, Lee changes his attack plan. He's now going to develop what's called an attack on echelon. And what this basically means is from south to north, first you have units that will attack here. And then later the next unit attacks. And then the next one, the next one, the next one. And you go bang, 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 right up the line. And what that does, it doesn't allow you to reinforce one part of the line, because as you do that, the next part of the line gets attacked. So here from the trust is an interesting picture of what's called an attack on echelon. And again, it starts with the brigades here of Hood's division and then works its way up the line. But in this attack plan, at no time did Lee say, we will attack Little Round Top. His plan was to attack the Union Army here where it was, and he never says in any order to anybody, let us attack Little Round Top because it holds the key to the Union left. Now, what happens also, of course, is that Hood is seriously wounded, and the command develops to Evander Law. Law pulls these two regiments here, swings them around up into this area. And what happens is, at the same time that this attack was to occur, the Third Corps and the Second Corps were to cooperate. Now, one of the other things we could talk about sometime in the future is A.P. Hill. Where was A.P. Hill during the Battle of Gettysburg? And what happened to his division commanders who basically sat on their hands? So Lee's orders again were to attack up the Emmitsburg Road in succeeding waves. Little Round Top was not an objective of his assault. So how do we get Little Round Top involved in all this? Well, as I mentioned, General Hood is severely wounded, and Brigadier General Evander Law becomes the commander almost by default of the division. And again, what happens now is the 15th and 47th Alabama, about 500 men, are now on the right of the Confederate line. Now, an interesting thing happens then. You have two mountains here, Little Round Top and Big Round Top. Now, Big Round Top is much higher than Little Round Top. And however, it is completely forested. If you've ever climbed up Big Round Top, it's full of boulders. It's very forested. It's basically useless from a military perspective. Little Round Top is, of course, lower, and we'll talk about this. It was forested only on the western side. The rest of the mountain, or the hill, was very highly forested. Looks very different than it does today. So although he was told to wheel left, Colonel Oates decided to follow Berdan's sharpshooters. His men had been shot at by Berdan's sharpshooters. So what he did is he took his two small regiments of about 500 men, and imagine this in the heat, he climbs up Big Round Top. Now, for those of you who have walked it, it's bad enough, but imagine climbing at this point. When he gets to the top, he writes, "Oh, I could defend this place forever." And he starts putting up logs and building a defensive line. Now, of course, the purpose of the Confederates that day is to launch an attack. They're not defending the line. So Laws, one of his aides, winds up here, finds Colonel Oates and says, "I'd love to be there to hear that conversation. My God, Colonel, what are you doing? We're not defending." So then he had to come down, and where does it bring him? But down this swale towards Little Round Top, completely accidentally. And now I think everybody is very familiar with what happened next. We have Major General Gouverneur Warren. Now, I think everybody knows the famous story. We're not exactly sure what's true here with Warren, but apparently one of Smith's guns was down here in what becomes known as the Valley of Death, Plum Run. And they fire a cannon off, and allegedly the Confederates move, and you can see the glistening, bayonets and everything, and they realize the Confederate attack is coming, which they probably saw anyway. And he, of course, rushes down the hill. He has one of his aides, and they find Brigadier General, Colonel at that time, Brigadier General Strong Vincent. And then, of course, this is indelibly in our minds that Strong Vincent then there's a heroic action. He dies at Gettysburg. He is mortally wounded in the battle. And if you've ever been up there, you can see the stone here that's engraved as a memorial to him. And then, of course, there's the very famous charge, the bayonet charge, and the defense of Little Round Top by Joshua Chamberlain, the 20th Maine. Of course, they were only one regiment in Strong Vincent's brigade, and the movie, the book, and many other authors kind of forget there were other soldiers present at the time. Of course, another thing we look at is Captain Charles Hazlitt, and how he managed to pull his cannon up to the top of Little Round Top. Now, of course, this was also extremely heroic, but I'm going to discuss Little Round Top as we get through it. So many men died on Little Round Top. As I mentioned, Colonel Strong Vincent, promoted on the battlefield to Brigadier General, lingers for a day or two and dies. Hazlitt is killed on Little Round Top. General Stephen Weed is killed, Colonel Patrick Henry O'Rourke, and many others. And these men fought with great courage, selflessness, and heroism throughout the battle. However, my idea is that had the Confederates captured the summit of Little Round Top, there are, in my review, 4 significant issues that demonstrate that from a military perspective to the Confederates, Little Round Top would have been generally useless. Now, first, as I mentioned to you, the heavy forestation, and there's a couple pictures here, and there's a few more I'll show you on the next slide. But you can see, as close to we could get to the battle, how forested Little Round Top was. And for those of you who are, of course, familiar with military organization, you have to line your men up. This is a typical battle line. 2 men, one behind the other, stretching through company after company after company. So you need to organize your men. You can't do that in a heavily forested and rocky situation. Here's 2 other pictures taken from the Library of Congress and Tipton, again showing that only the western face of Little Round Top was depleted of trees. This top and the back, the north and the northern face, the eastern face, the southern face, were all very heavily forested. And so from a military perspective, you can't make a camp there. You can't organize your men there. There's not much you can do with it. Now, let's look at the next part. The Union Army actually defeats the Confederate attack and maintains control of Little Round Top. And everybody then writes, oh, well, this saved the Union line. But let's really look at what it did. Now, the Union looks west. Remember, they're not looking north, there's trees. They're not looking east, there's trees. And they're not looking south, there's trees. Where are they looking? They're looking west. Pretty much what you see today. So this is the view of the Union Army. The Union regiments that were around here are all facing west and to some degree southwest. Notice the way they're all facing. So holding Little Round Top, the Union regiments faced west and southwest toward the Confederate lines. So they were facing this direction. The Confederates had Houck's Ridge, Devil's Den. The wheat field was kind of a no man's land, but across the Emmitsburg Road, all the way up to Plum Run, this was the Confederate line. And that's the way the Union victors, if you will, of Little Round Top were facing. Now, let's flip it. Suppose the Confederates had actually defeated the Union soldiers and took command of Little Round Top. They would be facing the same way, except those aren't Union soldiers they're facing. They would be facing their own lines. So had the Confederate infantry captured the top of Little Round Top, they would have faced west, just like the Union Army faced, except they'd be facing their own lines. Not one Confederate regiment would be facing a Union regiment or the Union line. They'd all be facing, for their purposes militarily, the wrong way. Now let's look at the next one. Let's assume again the Confederates had captured Little Round Top. Everybody who writes kind of forgets a little thing called the Sixth Corps. And by the afternoon of July 2nd, the Sixth Corps began to appear. And if you go and look at their monuments, you will see they are down surrounding the base of Little Round Top. And they were, by the end of the day, there were 20,000 Sixth Corps Union soldiers surrounding the base of Little Round Top. The arrival of the Sixth Corps effectively seals it off. So even if the Confederates had captured Little Round Top and they held the top of it, the infantry's facing the wrong way. And if they march down through this forest of trees, you can't march in a battle line. The men would have to wind their way down and then organize at the bottom, facing 20,000 Sixth Corps Union soldiers. Makes it completely untenable. And fourth, we can look at Charles Hazlitt. And again, he heroically manhandled his carrot cannons up to the summit. Now, initially, the guns could not suppress their muzzles low enough. to confront an infantry assault. But that's not really the issue. And again, if the Confederates had captured it, where would those cannons be facing? They'd be facing their own lines, going the wrong way. Now you say, well, wait a minute, Herb. We can turn those cannons and shoot up the Union line. Well, Larry Tagg demonstrates that you really can't do that. Because of all the woods and the boulders, they could only aim a single gun northward. And how do we know that? Well, we look at the Generals of Gettysburg by Larry Tagg, and he puts out in this book, it's something to me that's really instructive. Now, he did this to illustrate the field of artillery fire that the Union Army placed on the Confederate Army during Pickett's charge. But what I found interesting is here at the bottom, this is Little Round Top. And here's Lieutenant Rittenhouse with his guns. How many guns can he face north? One. Because it's demonstrated that during Pickett's charge, he was only able to fire one gun in the direction of where Pickett was coming. And if the Confederates had it, they would have the same problem. They'd only be able to aim one gun north, and they wouldn't be able to swing around to the line. They'd basically be shooting the same way. So this clearly demonstrates that had the Confederates captured it, militarily it's kind of useless. Now, what was Lee's real objective? Well, remember, he's a topographical engineer. And Lee sees the Cullips Hill, Cemetery Hill access as crucial. This line right here is what's important to General Lee, not Little Round Top. Again, on each day of the battle, he directed infantry attacks upon this access. The actions, of course, of Brigadier General George Sears Greene. A lot of people, I'm sure you know about what happened with General Greene. General Geary was ordered to take two of his brigades of the 12th Corps and move to the left in the defense of the attack on the left. And of course, what happens now, many of you might be familiar with the story, is that General Geary, marching down the Baltimore Pike, falls into what's known as an acoustic shadow. And on the left, while 20,000 to 30,000 men are shooting and cannons are going off and men are screaming and horses are neighing and screaming, Geary's men hears nothing. And his two brigades march down the Baltimore Pike, literally off the battlefield. They eventually turn around and come back, obviously. But what it does, Geary's movement leaves Greene with a single brigade to defend Cullips Hill. Now, Greene then does something that nobody else wanted to do, and he builds breastworks. And it's even recorded that he's criticized by his commanding officers for building breastworks. You got to be a manly man and stand there and shoot. Well, Greene says, I don't have enough men to be manly. And if you go to the top of Cullips Hill, and you look at the General Greene statue, and if you notice, he's pointing. Well, where is he pointing? He's pointing not to the Confederates. He's pointing down the line of his breastworks. And that statue was specifically designed to honor Greene and his decision to build breastworks. Greene's decision saves the Union Army. He never had more than around 1,350 troops or so. He was attacked by 4,000 to 5,000 Confederates. Now, what would have happened if Cullips Hill would have been taken? Suppose that attack had been successful. Look where that attack would have taken the Confederates. Right smack in the middle of the Union line. All of a sudden, the 2nd Corps and the remnants of the 1st Corps and the 11th Corps would have had Confederate soldiers shooting behind them. This assault, had it been successful, would have cut the Union line. This was the critical assault at the Battle of Gettysburg, not Little Round Top. Then in the evening, we had the very famous attack of Isaac Avery and Harry Hayes on East Cemetery Hill. One of the most dramatic and ferocious fights of the entire Battle of Gettysburg. And this is when eventually darkness falls, and these guys are literally shooting at muzzle flashes. Now, the problem for the two Confederates is that they were not reinforced. General Robert Rhodes, after the first day, takes the rest of the battle off. And John Gordon's brigade is, committed to something else. So when Samuel Carroll's men then run out of the darkness and smash into the Confederate lines, the line is saved. It's clear that had the Cemetery Hill attack been successful, or had the Cullips Hill attacks been successful, look where that puts the Confederates. They crossed the Baltimore Pike. This is the Union supply line, the Baltimore Pike. They smashed through here. They would cut off the Union retreat, and they'd split the Union army in two. These were the important assaults that Lee clearly understood with his engineer's eye. Down here, not so much. Now, had John Bell Hood not been wounded, had a very excellent Confederate division commander, William Dorsey Pender, not been mortally wounded, Richard Ewell did not have sufficient men available. And as I mentioned, A.P. Hill kind of disappears. We don't know what happened to A.P. Hill during the Battle of Gettysburg. Probably sick at the time or ill. The entire battle might have been different. What we realized from what General Lee wrote, and we realized from the actual attacks that were made, Lee was focused on breaking the Union right flank. He knew that if he could break this flank and swing in here, he'd be behind the Union line, he'd control the Baltimore Pike, and he'd break the Union army in two. If you capture Little Round Top, you capture Little Round Top. It's down here at the bottom, but it doesn't break the Union army. And always remember something, because a lot of people had mentioned to me, well, this would have let the Confederates back in here to the artillery park. You forget about the 20,000 man 6th Corps that by the afternoon had arrived in this position right here. So Lee's plans for the attacks of July 2nd and allowed 3rd, Little Round Top was never a designated objective. The first attack was a flank assault, which completely bypasses Little Round Top. And then there was an en echelon assault, basically starting in the south and going like this up the Emmitsburg Road. My position is, had the Confederate attacks been successful, had they gained possession of Little Round Top, it is my premise they would not have gained any military advantage at all. They would simply have held a small prominence that from a Confederate point of view was completely useless to them for a military perspective. The single cleared face was facing west toward their own lines. Only one or possibly two cannon could have been brought forward to fire on the Union flank. The heavily wooded north and east face of Little Round Top would have broken up any battle lines, making a concentrated infantry attack difficult, if not impossible. And had they attempted to attack the Union rear from Little Round Top, they would not have the time or space to dress their lines, as they come directly, as they climb down the mountain into the 20,000 man 6th Corps. General Lee knew that a breakthrough on Cemetery Hill, Cullips Hill would have broken the Union lines. He writes that he knew that these two commanding elevations held the key to the Battle of Gettysburg. The Confederate possession of Little Round Top would not have altered the outcome of the battle.